Hello, I'm Cara Dahl Russell. We continue our series Courtly Love and the Cult of the Virgin, today discussing mysticism and the power of relics. The idea that the world and daily life are filled with magic and unexplainable happenings is foreign to us today. But as we enter the year 1000, that is exactly how life was seen. Today we would shrug and say, you're entitled to your belief, but in this time period, the mystical idea that life is filled with good and evil magic, with blessings and curses, was considered rational, informed thought. And that is a huge adjustment for us when we try to envision the life of these times. We have to try to envision a world where not only do the vast majority of people not read, but a very few people have anything near what we would consider a basic education. The rudimentary essentials of life are on a seasonal timetable that only farmers understand today, and on a small personal scale of what could be handled and accomplished by hand during daylight hours, whether it was tilling the soil, preparing meals, or making fabric to make the family clothing. And we have to remember that this lifestyle was fairly uniform throughout the social strata. Even for the lady of the castle we mentioned yesterday, much of her day would have been spent in handwork for essentials, even if they were more ornate in comparison to that of the serf farmer's wife. The mystery of the sun coming up and setting, the vagaries of the seasons, were of enormous importance in a daily, tangible way. The winter we've had in the northern United States this year has thwarted many of our modern conveniences. It is then a very small wonder that a winter like this, in the year 1000, would have seemed to be a very direct and real punishment from God, or the devil directly taking control. It's worth mentioning that 700 years later, when two similarly harsh winters destroyed crops and output in the 1700s in France, it was blamed on the wasteful lives of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Of course, in the early 1000s, there were the folk beliefs of witches and other magical creatures, and even the ideas of the seasons and weather having a spirit and mind of its own also held sway in many minds. So when the Church of the Day depended on mysticism, blessings, and relics, it was not really an issue of the Church trying to use pop culture to spread their beliefs. It was just still very much that these church people were raised in this culture. They were part of this daily world that was dependent on uncontrollable nature, as was everyone else. Their belief in the mystical, the magical, the miraculous was not only a matter of personal or corporate faith, it was a part of the entire social fabric. It was the cumulative, acquired wisdom of the day. The clerics, being among the most literate and the most educated of the society, still were immersed in these beliefs. The Church's beliefs in relics and their particular power, put into context with that social belief system, gave relics a unique cultural power within the Church and outside. When they were only 1,000 years removed from the death of Christ, it did not seem so far-fetched that someone might have been able to save one of his bones or that of a saint. The proximity of time made it reasonable. There was no internet for people in the village of northern France to check and see that the finger of a saint in a northern village was also supposed to be in 3 other villages, much less to compare it against those of another country. Ignorance may not have been bliss, but it certainly did help belief. And it was both the cultural atmosphere and the power of relics that helped the Church convince the lords of the region to agree to the peace and truce of Christ that we discussed on Monday. While the church communities were overwhelmingly male as we entered the 11th century, the shifting roles of women were taking shape there as well. Sometimes a woman devotee would become anchoress of the monastery and would live in a building attached outside the wall. Then these communities grew. As we mentioned yesterday, noble women, being largely raised in a closed female community, with their education and enforced marriages, this all gave a combination of reasons for women to prefer the life of a nun. As with the life in a castle, a lady of higher intellect could rise within the order. A rare and perfect example of this time, these choices, and this life was Hildegard von Bingen. Born in 1179, she began having mystic visions at the age of 5. Her parents devoted her to religious life by 6. She was educated, wrote, including medical treatises, and composed the devotional music by which she remains known today. In her 50s, in 1136, she became head of a Benedictine convent. It was only in her 70s that she went public with her visions. By that time, she was so established that she was consulted by nobility and kings. Hildegard von Bingen, of course, was not the norm. The combination of education, training, talent, and her mystical visions raised her far above the average woman of any class. Her leadership of the convent gave her an exceptional amount of self-determination, as well as opportunities to lead and to travel. As rare as her life was, it has withstood the boundaries of her own time as a religious example, but in a larger context as a confirmation of how much the place of women and the possibilities for women had grown and changed in this time period. Timing is everything, and as we will discuss later in the series this month, the great irony of her fame and life is that had she lived 100 years later in the 1200s, she might well have been burned at the stake for the same skills, talents, and visions.